This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's Electric Cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. Easy for me to say. They include Chris Fitzsimon, Executive Director of NC Policy Watch, former Secretary of State, former Attorney General Rufus Edmisten, former representatives and soon-to-be Board of Governor members, Leo Daughtry, and John Hood, Syndicated columnist and author. Well, this week's show should be interesting as we talk about the Supreme Court's decision upholding a lower court ruling denying voter ID in our state. We'll discuss the disappointing news that the federal government will only fund $6 million of a $900 million request for Hurricane Matthew recovery funding, and a House proposal that could put a $1.9 billion school bond construction referendum before voters. And of course, as always, we'll ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's begin. The U.S. Supreme Court announced it would not take up North Carolina's appeal of the voter ID provision in our election laws. A lower court had decided that our ID requirement targeted African Americans, quote, with almost surgical precision. The McCrory administration filed an appeal of that decision to the Supreme Court, but then Governor Cooper withdrew the appeal. Leo Daughtry, Chief Justice John Roberts said, the decision not to review should not be interpreted as a message about the substance of the case, but that there were strong indications the court acted because there was a blizzard of filings, as he said, over who is and who hasn't authorized to seek the review. Does this indicate that if Governor Cooper had not withdrawn, the court might have considered the appeal?
That's correct. As you said, there was no mention of the merits of the case. It was a case on a writ of certiorari or a writ of cert to take up a matter, and as you say in golf, the case wasn't teed up correctly. And as a result of that, the Cooper and General Stein withdrew any interest that North Carolina may have had in the case, and because of that, the General Assembly objected, and I think Justice Roberts correctly said this is a matter that's not ready to be heard.
So, Rufus, could the legislature and a representative, their legal representative from the legislature, resume this case and appeal it?
Well, you still have the ruling of the Fourth Circuit.
I understand, but they would appeal that ruling.
That's the law right now.
Yes.
I think they'd have to start way over again something because that Fourth Circuit was very precise. It said what they thought the law was, and I don't quite know how they would word such a thing, but it seems like they're going to try.
So the fundamental problem with this entire issue even is the way we described that the U.S. Supreme Court did not take up North Carolina's appeal. No, the point is it wasn't clear in their minds whether there was an appeal, because there were private counsel that had been representing the state all along who appealed to the Supreme Court. There was also the Attorney General who had basically been deferring to the private counsel when Roy Cooper was Attorney General. Then he became governor. Josh Stein, who was a witness in the case, it should have had nothing to do with it, took office as Attorney General, then not just refused to participate and let the private counsel continue, actually pulled back a case that the counsel representing North Carolina wanted to appeal. So that it was so confusing that the Supreme Court, as Leo says, simply didn't know whether there was an appeal they didn't know who was going to be in front of them and who they were representing. All this is done. This has not resolved anything. All this means now is the legislature will pass another voter ID bill, maybe with some other provisions, maybe not. It'll go all the way back through the federal courts again, and this time they will make it clear that the lawyers representing the state will represent the state, and that will not be the Attorney General.
So does this mean that, Chris, that it will go back to the Fourth Circuit?
Well, it means it'll go through the federal courts if someone sues, if the General Assembly passes this law. A couple of things. First of all, it's not unusual for the Supreme Court to deny writ of certiorari without talking about the merits of the case. In fact, Justice Roberts said, as is often the case, this is not some hugely unusual thing that here's a case they don't take up for whatever reason, number one. Number two, it does mean the Fourth Circuit decision is still in place. And number three, we keep everybody on the show, and Senator Berger and everybody talks about the voter ID bill. This is not just a voter ID bill. Well, it's a big deal. They passed a voter ID bill, and they were going to, and then after the voting rights ruling came, they said, oh, let's do everything. It went from a 13-page bill to a 57-page bill, same-day registration, out-of-precinct voting, a whole bunch of other stuff. It's really important that people understand that it's not just about voter ID, and expanding it, I think, is really what got the legislature into the legal problem. I don't think we need a voter ID, but we sure don't need this giant 57-page change to our voting laws. That's why the Fourth Circuit and other people have struck it down.
In my opinion, Tom, they got to try something else because they litigated the Fourth Circuit. I don't know how you go back and appeal that.
We have a new bill, new law.
A new law.
Okay, well, let's play this one. Let's tee this one up, Leo, as you said. All right. So 32 states have voter ID. 32, many of these states either have no early voting or they have early voting similar to ours. What's the legislature got to do in order to be able to get past the courts and make sure that they don't discriminate people?
Well, they can pass a bill in the General Assembly and it becomes law, but the truth is they've had a lot of trouble with the Fourth Circuit. The Fourth Circuit.
They've had a lot of trouble with a lot of courts.
Well, mostly the Fourth Circuit. And I think that they want to see whether or not the Supreme Court will hear the matter because, as you say, so many other states already has voter ID.
All right.
And they may take some of the things out of that bill when the new bill comes up that was not in this other bill.
All right, let's play this one then, Rufus. Let's talk about this Supreme Court, as Leo was talking about. We got a totally different court now than we've had in the past. Judge Gorsuch.
Yes.
Gorsuch now is on the court. What would that do? The court traditionally has ruled against discrimination and disenfranchising voters. Do you expect that to change?
Well, the court was a 4-4 on that cert hearing, as I understand. And of course, Mr. Gorsuch, or Justice Gorsuch, traditionally makes it 5-4 conservative. That's why I think they're so anxious to get it back up there in some way to try it under the new Supreme Court makeup.
All right, so let's speculate a little bit. Chris, you spend a fair amount of time over in the legislature. What do you speculate that the new the Republican-controlled legislature election law changes might include?
Well, I think I'm sure it'll have some photo ID requirement. The question is what it'll have beyond that and how the photo ID requirement, what exceptions will be allowed, what people can do if they don't have an ID when they vote. It's very complicated. It's worth noting the Board of Elections audit that found a few hundred people who voted either improperly, whatever, found one case that would have been affected by a voter ID law. So if you're looking for the facts of where we need one or not, there's pretty compelling evidence that we don't have a problem that voter ID would solve.
So how does a photo ID get implemented, John, that is not one that disenfranchises or discriminates?
Well, most of the country has it. Many countries around the world have it. There's no big mystery about it.
How did they escape the lawsuits?
First of all, they had judges that didn't make things up. I mean, remember, the district court did an extensive finding of fact. Typically, a court of appeals, in this case, Fourth Circuit, if they disagreed with how the district court interpreted the facts, they would have remanded it back with some instructions. They just invented their own findings of fact based on, among other things, an appearance on The Daily Show. That was actually cited in a footnote in the Court of Appeals decision, which should have been laughable, and yet people took it seriously. I think that if they go back through, they will probably do a photo ID requirement, as Chris said, maybe some other things, but they will try to mirror lots of things that have happened in other states that might have been upheld in other courts. And I think that everybody knows that if this decision had been successfully appealed to the Supreme Court, the most likely outcome would have been reversing the Fourth Circuit. That's why the Attorney General, in my opinion, and the Governor, Roy Cooper, made every effort to sabotage the state's case so it wouldn't get to the Supreme Court. That was the plan, and it worked, but not in the long run.
Interesting. Every week, people are signing up to receive our free weekly email newsletter, Spin Cycle. It's easy to do. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, and sign up. And while you're there, you can view the latest NC Spin program, get video footage and perspective pieces not seen anywhere else, and read my weekly column. Get more balanced debate from the Old North State at ncspin.com, NC Spin on Facebook, on YouTube, or on Twitter at NC Spin Tweets. When we come back, no hurricane help for North Carolina.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
North Carolina has over 300,000 government retirees who depend on their pension. Since the 2008 recession, retirees have seen little or no cost of living increase, while inflation has increased more than 14%. Investing in our retirees is good for the economy. Every pension dollar generates more than $2 for your local economy. Tell your local and state elected official it's time to take care of our retirees and fund a cost of living increase.
Learn more at ncrgea.com.
Every year, North Carolina patients undergo 635,000 same-day surgeries. 72% of these surgeries are performed in our highest-cost hospital facilities, adding as much as $2,000 to every procedure. The state's outdated Certificate of Need law prevents competition from lower-cost, higher-quality same-day surgery centers, inflating healthcare costs and limiting patient choice. Tell state lawmakers it's time to lower healthcare costs now. It's time to make a simple fix to an outdated law, increasing patient choice and lowering healthcare costs now. You can help. Visit reformconnow.com and tell lawmakers it's time for a simple fix to an outdated law. It's time to lower healthcare costs now.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
Many of the 300,000 uninsured in our state are volunteer firefighters, farmers, fishermen, and small business owners. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
Following Hurricane Matthew's devastating effect on Eastern Carolina, our governor applied to the federal government for $900 million in federal assistance to help repair and restore homes and businesses and also protect low-lying areas. The response from Washington was disappointing, as we learned the amount that would be given to North Carolina was only $6.1 million. Rufus, the message from Washington was loud and clear. There's no help coming. Was this because our application wasn't well prepared, because of the new administration in Washington, or why?
Well, I've seen a lot of these disaster reliefs before. They've always been considered hands-off partisan politics. And I don't believe there's any sinister motive there. I just think that we haven't gotten it all together yet. Now, I do know that the governor was in D.C. last week, and he met with our delegation, all Republican and Democratic, and they all agreed that they're going to push hard, because part of this is asking the Congress to appropriate money for future preventative measures. So that's part of what this huge
Yeah, but
thing
Leo,
was.
this is a paltry response. I mean, if you compare it with like Hurricane Sandy, when the state of New York got $17 billion in relief aid, I mean, this just looks like chicken feed.
Well, I do agree with that. I don't think anybody would disagree that $1 million and with this storm is a lot of money. But as Rufus said, I think Roy's got to do more work than he's done to get some support. And I don't think he's going to get $900 million when it's over. I think he'll get something between that.
Well, let's remember that North Carolina has already gotten
We've gotten
$1 billion.
some, yes. How much?
$1 billion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're not talking about, well, some other states had hurricanes and they got $1 billion or $3 billion or $4 billion and we got $6 million. No, we got $1 billion already. So this is about a supplemental request. And certainly there could be arguments for some of it, but I have seen lots of misunderstandings of this as if this was the entire federal response to the hurricane. That is absolutely false.
I was going to bring that up. But Chris, okay, so let's run this down. The governor's request, $434 million was to be used to buy out, elevate, or rebuild nearly 4,000 pieces of property. $245 million was going to repair homes, $43 million to fix public facilities, $39 million to help 700 small businesses, and $37 million for health and mental health services. Does that sound reasonable?
Well, it does. The bulk of this is facilities. The bulk of this is housing. The News Observer, I thought, had an interesting piece recently about people still living in these almost squalid conditions who had rental homes. The homes hadn't been rebuilt. There's no money to rebuild the homes for the renters or the property owners. And I do think Governor Cooper needs to do more, but I also think the Republican majority delegation in Congress needs to do more. They should be as appalled as we all are at the paltry response. And then it does, at some point, we have the largest rainy day fund in North Carolina in our history. And for people who live in Robeson County and Lenore County and some of these other places, it rained. And that's what the rainy day fund is for. So at some point, not $1 billion, but the state may have to step up and do some more itself.
So, Leo, how much is in that rainy day reserve fund right now?
A little over $1 billion, as I recall.
So are we to understand that the state might be willing to apply that whole amount of money to the hurricane relief? And if they don't, what happens to these people who need the help?
Well, first of all, the rainy day fund, that wording is a misnomer. That money was set aside for recessions that come when we can't pay our debts. And we have had really to rob Peter and pay Paul. There were times when we were not paying a debt June 30th and paid it July 1st so we could have a balanced budget. And so this money is set aside to make sure that doesn't happen again. As to the hurricane damage, the General Assembly, I'm confident, will do all that they can do to make sure the people in Robeson County and everywhere in the East are looked after. But as you say, they spent $1 billion, and I don't recall how much the General Assembly has appropriated, but it's been a large amount of money.
We've spent a couple $100 million.
About $100 million out of the rainy day fund and some other money.
They promised more that was going to be coming
and other
this year.
money coming. And I do think that additional funds from the state for state responsibilities is appropriate.
Well, I do want to remind people that President Trump came to North Carolina. He says, I want to help you folks. And I'm waiting, President Trump.
I think we need to call that IOU. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about $1.9 billion in school construction funds.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
In 2011, our farmers asked for 6,500 seasonal workers. Only 7 Americans showed up to work those jobs. Immigrant farm workers aren't stealing American jobs. To say otherwise ignores the facts. When farmers don't have enough skilled workers, crops go unharvested and farmers lose money. Consumers face fewer choices and higher prices. This is not acceptable. Tell Congress it's time to fix our broken immigration system.
I am Kathy Merritt, and I have worked at Cherry Hospital, a state-run psychiatric facility, for 27 years. Like 1 in 3 state employees, I still earn less than $31,000 a year because we haven't had a decent pay raise in years. When I started at 20 years old, that was a wonderful thing to have a state job. That's not the case anymore. And I love the job that I do. I just can't make it on what I do. It's not right. I work very hard. I love what I do, but it's difficult when you're not getting paid for what you do. You can't raise 2 kids on the salary that I had and not work another job and not apply for food stamps and not apply for medical benefits for your children. Tell your legislators to support a pay increase for state employees. Learn more at scenic.org.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
While the Senate budget proposed more funding for public school construction, the House held hearings this past week about possibly putting a $1.9 billion school construction bond referendum to the voters. Chris, help us in understanding the potential House action. Is the House essentially repudiating the Senate budget items on school construction? Don't think it's enough, or why?
Well, they think that they certainly don't think it's enough, but Senator Tillman has his own version of this, so I think there's a widespread bipartisan feeling in the General Assembly that we have to do something, especially for rural school systems and the urban ones too, but especially rural areas that haven't built schools in a long time. I think this is a good idea. It's a good start. Interest rates are low and all those things, but it also, not to get into the detail again, it also begs the question of our lottery money and how we're allocating that. Instead of every year they find something else to take out of the lottery proceeds, which if we're going to have the ridiculous lottery, all that money, I think most of it, not all, but most of it should go to school construction in addition to this bond issue.
John, at the time that we were taping this show, the House hadn't passed this legislation, but if they did, how would it be received in the state Senate?
I think very cautiously. I know this is sort of old-fashioned of me to say, but traditionally, school construction is not a state funding responsibility. It's something that the local governments would do. And there's nothing magical about saying, well, local governments can't afford it. Have the state do it. It's all the same money from the same people across the state, unless you're going to have taxpayers in Mecklenburg, Wake, Guilford, Forsyth pay once for their schools and then once again for somebody else's schools. Now, see if that's popular there. I suspect you'll find it's not.
But, Leo, in the rural areas of the state, this is particularly problematic.
It is.
For instance, one of the suggestions that was made was that for those counties that didn't have a transit tax, we'd let them increase the sales tax. Well, when you ain't got a sales tax base to start off with, increasing it's not going to help much.
We had the same problem in 1996, I believe, or 97. We passed a $1.9 billion school bond construction at that time. It was very popular all over the state, and people these counties that are poor get behind in their school construction. They just really do. Schools are left and they just are unable to keep them up. And I think it'll pass. I think it's a good idea, and I think it'll be a good thing for the rural counties.
Rufus, nobody's going to refute the fact that we need to be building more schools in North Carolina, and as Leo says, we're falling behind. But my question is this the highest need for public infrastructure in our state? Should the bond package either be resized or include transportation and clean water monies?
Well, you should always have clean water money, but at the same time, I think people are getting a chance. The House bill says we let the people vote on this, and that is the proper way to do it. Too much stuff gets passed nowadays. Bond issues.
I got that, but my question is, should we expand this to include?
I would certainly do that, and especially for clean water.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to do that, but
not.
Whether they should or not. The other thing to remember, and Leah touched on it, I think you did too, there are some counties, I think it is Greene County, that already has a ridiculously high property tax rate. They're being told all the time, pay for it yourself. Well, they don't have the tax base to tax themselves, and if they raise enough money from property taxes, nobody will live there because the property taxes are so high.
Is Greene County adding lots of students and having a school construction
crisis?
I don't think so.
They have dilapidated schools that are unsafe, but they can't pay for it.
That's a different matter than, I mean, we typically have talked about we can't keep up with school construction. But that's an urban phenomenon.
This bill has renovations and repairs and new facilities for replacement.
And really, we should issue state bonds,
well, how else are they going to pay for it,
bonds?
John? How is Greene County going to pay for it?
Local governments pay for the local component of schools. That includes facilities. Now, I know that line has been eroded some, but you lose something when you don't have these things submitted to local taxpayers to vote about local bonds.
And a long time ago, the local school systems paid for everything, and the state had to come in because some areas couldn't afford it, and we're at that point with construction.
Well, it is certainly a thorny issue, and I'm sure it's one that will...
Some of it will be renovation money. Some of those old schools are sound. Contrary to what people say, they just need to be rehabilitated.
All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina has over 300,000 government retirees who depend on their pension. Since the 2008 recession, retirees have seen little or no cost of living increase, while inflation has increased more than 14%. Investing in our retirees is good for the economy. Every pension dollar generates more than $2 for your local economy. Tell your local and state elected official it's time to take care of our retirees and fund a cost of living increase.
Learn more at ncrgea.com.
The healthcare landscape is filled with questions and uncertainties of changes that are coming. In these times of change, there's one thing you can trust. You can trust your family physician to work for you, not only in treating sickness and disease, but also your overall health. Regardless of how healthcare might change, the men and women of the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians pledge to work upholding your trust. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisors.
12,000 North Carolina veterans are uninsured with no options to buy health insurance. They fought for us. Now let's fight for them. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
I am Kathy Merritt, and I have worked at Cherry Hospital, a state-run psychiatric facility, for 27 years. Like 1 in 3 state employees, I still earn less than $31,000 a year because we haven't had a decent pay raise in years. When I started at 20 years old, that was a wonderful thing to have a state job. That's not the case anymore. And I love the job that I do. I just can't make it on what I do. It's not right. I work very hard. I love what I do, but it's difficult when you're not getting paid for what you do. You can't raise 2 kids on the salary that I had and not work another job and not apply for food stamps and not apply for medical benefits for your children. Tell your legislators to support a pay increase for state employees. Learn more at scenic.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
All right, now we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. John Hood, I'll start with you.
Tom, according to the latest estimates, the state health plan has a $42 billion unfunded liability. It's running a deficit again this year that will have to be covered with general revenues. This remains a serious issue that needs serious attention.
And so far, the budget doesn't take care of that.
There are some long-term changes.
Leo, tell us something we don't know.
There was a study done by the research at NC State about what we could do for rural North Carolina. They came up with building a food processing plant somewhere to make sure we could use the vegetables that we could grow in our area.
Interesting.
8,000 jobs.
Yeah. How many?
8,000.
Tell us something we
It
don't
looks
know.
like we're going to finally quit trying 16, 17 years old in adult courts. And the Youth Legislative Council has been instrumental in that because I've had them for 2 years as a coach. Proud of them.
Former Senator Fletcher Hartsell was sentenced by federal court to eight months in federal prison for campaign finance irregularity. Senator Heiss is on fire, under fire, not nearly the extent of the problem, but he does have big issues with his reports. You're going to keep hearing about this issue. We got to have everybody file electronically, have qualified treasurers. This issue's not going away.
And interestingly enough, both of these are Republicans with a Republican-controlled state board of elections.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. Join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. And until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.